Welcome to the Fishing Daily podcast with me, Oliver McBride. In this episode, I welcome Mike Park OBE from the Scottish Whitefish Producers Association, the largest association in Europe. And Mike, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and thank you for the invitation.
It's good to see you, Mike. Mike, Brexit. The Scottish fishing industry hoped for a lot more and it hasn't materialised.
Yeah, alas, we didn't get what we promised. We thought we would get a change, to the extent that it would change our lives. And what we have managed to receive is something that does change our lives, but in a negative way. Our catchphrase at the time was Sea of Opportunity, and that just never materialised. You look at what Norway takes out of the sea, of their own seas, 80% of the stocks, Iceland, 90% of the stocks. We wanted to move, to be similar to them. But in many cases, we've gained nothing. And in a lot of cases, we've just gained a fraction of what we wanted. So the reality for the men that I represent, the fishermen themselves, is that in terms of opportunities, they actually have less to catch this year in terms of shares than they have previously. And that's a result of previously being able to trade in fish from other EU member states, the club that we were a member of. We're doing that now slightly, but we still don't have the opportunities that we need as an industry to continue the way we have in the past.
With COVID and Brexit, what's it like on the ground out there now for the fishermen?
It's dire. A lot of the enthusiasm, a lot of the positiveness that created our recent modernisation of the fleet has started to dwell away. I mean, we still have a number of vessels coming into the fleet, mainly in the NEFROP sector, but these were vessels that were planned 2, 3, 4, and sometimes 5 years ago. So it's almost the legacy of that positive attitude at that time. Prawn fishing is good, but the price is depressed. The whitefish sector doesn't have the quotas it needs in the main species like cod and saithe and hake. They don't have them to land. And then the haddock fishery, of which there's abundance of small haddock, the tipping point in terms of the price is so low that we can't land most of our haddock. I think we're about 30% of the total landings of the total allowable catch this year, which is nothing like what it should be. We don't have access to Faroe waters, so the big boats are crammed up in the west of Scotland with limited quotas. We can't get access to Norwegian zone, where we catch mainly our better haddock at this time of the year. So, you piece that together like a jigsaw. What you have is a very, very depressed industry in the meantime, which is starting to say, where do we go next?
Do you think 5, 6 years' time, will things change as the more quota comes onto the market for the Scottish men?
Over time, I mean, unless the stocks rebuild in terms of the cod stock rebuilds, and we're not going to see much changes there because our share in the cod isn't going to change over time. The haddock stock, there's going to be the biggest ever recorded spawning biomass by 2023, but unless we do something to assist the market in being able to receive those fish, we're not going to make much inroads into that unless we can land haddock as a different product, like frozen blocks into the protein market or whatever. But the underpinning, question that you asked about where will we be in 4, 5, 6 years, I personally think that we will see some consolidation of the fleet. I think that's inevitable. I also think that we'll see greater vertical cooperation between onshore and offshore, and perhaps maybe even integration with onshore and offshore linking more closely than they do currently. But I think, we are going to see a different environment moving forward. With technical creep, vessels are more efficient anyhow, which would lead to consolidation. But I just think the shortage of opportunities in some key areas will mean that skippers, young and old, will have to look around them to see what they need to do to shore up their business.
Is there other factors out there that could squeeze the fishermen as well? Like, we're seeing a lot of offshore wind farms coming online. We've got fish farms, and we've also got government committing to us at 30% of the seas being turned into MPAs. Surely that's a concern for the fishing industry as well.
It is. I mean, I don't know if you follow motor racing, but they're always on about marginal gains, and what's happening in the fishing sector is sort of marginal losses. It's these constant squeeze as that we're feeling. In the west of Scotland, we have more and bigger fish farms, in the lochs where some of our members trawl for nephrops. Offshore, we're now seeing conflict as well between static gear vessels and mobile gear vessels. The static gear consists of gill net and lines, mainly foreign registered, but we do have UK registered vessels as well. So you've got that competition for space there. We've always had the rigs and pipelines since the 70s, but now we have vast wind farms and the cables, and that's a squeeze. And we're now seeing, they're wanting to put wind farms around some of the oil installations as well, which leads to bigger problems, because most of our best fisheries are around sort of oil rigs, which were deployed in some of the shoal areas and that. So we are coming under constant pressure in terms of losing fishing areas. And the point we're trying to get across is that as an industry, as a UK citizen, we understand the benefits of moving to carbon-free sort of energies, and we totally get the benefits of wind farms and protecting the planet. But there are vast areas of the sea that we don't fish. Your fish doesn't appear everywhere. Fish tends to appear in the same locations time and time again. Please, stay away from those locations. Put the wind farms in areas that we never fish, but allow us to keep our fishing footprint, and that way we can cohabit the seas with other people. But if you start robbing us of our prime fishing areas, then immediately we're going to come into conflict with you, and it's not good for a sector that's coming under pressure in all sorts of ways that we've discussed previously in this podcast. It just seems that fishing seems to be the kicking boy of some sectors of society. Most sectors of society get the fact that fishing has got to continue, but we do come under constant pressure from others, and the seas piracy, videos and other constant press releases. Social media's full of it the whole time. Scallop dredging comes under the cosh all the time. We're now seeing Denmark looking to ban bottom trawling. It's as an industry, we are coming under constant pressure that is putting a squeeze on the amount of money that's returned to the bottom line. And at the end of the day, business is about getting money to the bottom line.
Is there a consultation going on between yourselves and the offshore industry, wind farm industry?
Yeah, there's a constant consultation goes on. There's just a new round of licenses being granted just now, and we will enter into dialogue with the companies that were successful in gaining those licenses. But at the end of the day, all we get to do as an industry is to try and shape where that wind farm goes within a previously designated area. We can have some influence over that, but the areas are previously designated, which, we wish that we could be in there at the earliest stage in terms of consultation. But it seems to be that we are being consulted on from the middle of the stage, forward. It doesn't seem to be that we're seen as prime candidates for consultation at the very, very early stages where the areas are being designated.
If you're coming in the middle of it, it must be harder to win the fight.
Yeah. I mean, it's like everything else. We're all avid voyeurs of politics, and if you look at politics, there is a real curve of influence. I remember writing an article about the curve of influence within Europe, and it's just the same in any sector, that you have your most influence when people are beginning to think about what they're going to do. You have your least influence when they've decided and they're now asking you whether you like it or not.
Is this the same situation with the marine protected areas? Are you not being consulted on this, or at the beginning, and maybe are we seeing maybe an overdrive for marine protected areas?
Yeah, I mean, we have been more influential in the marine protected area sort of discussions than we have on wind farm. Wind farms are commercial operators, whereas the MPAs are being put in place to protect, a number of things, VMEs and things as mundane as sandy rips and various other things. But we have been more influential in the shaping and the management measures, setting out what the management measures will be within the MPAs. And, you know, similar to wind turbines, we understand the need to put MPAs in place. Indeed, our association, in alliance with WWF, put in a box to protect cold water corals, Lophelia, at Rockall. You know, closures to protect blue line west of Scotland. So we do have a good sort of a good set of credentials in terms of working with others to protect, you know, the areas of the sea or the seabed that need protected. So we're not against that, but you know, I think, you know, the wind farm situation could look at our consultation relationship with the MPA network and learn something from it, to be fair. And we have been given, you know, some very comforting words from the Scottish government that the consultation process on wind farms going forward will be better. So, you know, we'll have to take that at face value at the moment.
On the fish farm fronts, is your members being affected by the growth of fish farms?
Yeah, so we represent a number of vessels in the west of Scotland. In fact, we represent or act on behalf of the Mulligan Norwest Fishermen's Association. And there's a great number of their members are impacted upon the wind farms in the west of Scotland, fish farms in the west of Scotland, and we are now seeing those becoming bigger and bigger, you know, encroaching onto more prone areas. But it's not only that; it's the pollution and the contamination of the surrounding areas as well. So it's a bone of contention for our members around there, or those we represent around there. And it doesn't seem to be getting any easier, because every other week we get new applications, either for new cages or bigger cages or relocation of cages. And it goes back to this point, you know, it's just marginal losses the whole time. But, you know, in the west of Scotland, the fish farm industry does bring a lot of investment locally, and it does bring a lot of employment locally. But that doesn't mean to say that they should be able to push the wild capture fisheries out, because, you know, predominantly these are the industry that keeps the coastal network in place.
Does your members think that these fish farms are causing not just spatial problems, but do you think they're causing other problems towards the wild fish in the area?
I mean, you know, they always think that it's the, you know, pollution is a bad thing, and you know, we've seen pictures and footage of some of the seabed under the cages, you know, the lice and the fish and everything. Now, I know the fish farms trying and you know, solve that problems as much as they possibly can, but inadvertently, you know, the men that we represent around there are very unhappy about A, the location, but B, obviously the pollution that comes with that as well, because nobody knows going forward what sort of fatal impact that may have on the seabed and the wider area around them. So it's always a bone of contention. And, you know, we always get accused by members of not doing enough. But, you know, as I say, we've got to cohabit with other industries, but I wish people would look at us as a sort of an equal partner in there than some do. But at the end of the day, you know, we just have to ensure that they don't encroach any further onto the prime fishing areas. And it's the same as the wind farms. There are areas there where we don't catch fish. Please utilize them more than the areas where we do catch fish.
Another area of concern, and we're on about, is Seaspirity. They have totally misrepresented what bottom trawling and everything else is about. How do you feel about what this sort of like propaganda is doing towards the fishing industry?
It soaks up a lot of energy. You know, the Seafish Industry Authority, I mean, they were straight on the case, putting some of the facts right. And it's the same as when Hugh Fenley-Whittingstall got involved in terms of discards and various other things. It just puts out an untrue mixed message. You know, does the fishing industry have to improve its impact on seabeds and that? Well, yeah, we do. And we're constantly striving to make gear lighter, to make the contact less. We're moving into, you know, more fuel efficient vessel design, more fuel efficient engines. So as an industry, we will continue to evolve. But some of the messages in terms of fishing, its impact coming out, on social media and indeed mainstream media with the likes of Seaspirity. It just, you know, it takes the message from other parts of the world and portrays it as though this is on your doorstep, this is your industry, but in fact it's not. And then we spend an inordinate amount of time and resource trying to reverse that thought and put the truth out there. But you know as well as I do that newspapers, the media, they like things that are different. You know, telling them that everything is nice and wonderful doesn't satisfy their customers. And it's these extreme positions and extreme points, and not only in fishing, we see it in other areas as well, tends to sway the public's attitude towards us. And as I say, we spend an inordinate amount of time and resource trying to reverse that. But, you know, they are funded and they have to be seen to be extreme to maintain that funding. The same goes with Greenpeace and others, you know, dropping boulders in the sea with stars' names on them. What's that all about? But it's about trying to capture the imagination. But, you know, more often than not, it's just as a way to maintain their funding from mainly overseas funders, big institutions.
There seems to be a lot of attention in the media on issues like this rather than on like the serious issues for fishing. And one of these serious issues that's coming up is the autumn negotiations. What are you hoping for from that?
Yeah, I mean, the industry doesn't have its problems to seek, because, you know, all the things we've mentioned before is one element, but then you're right. You know, we live on catching opportunities, and those catching opportunities are set on the back of the International Council for Exploration of the Seas, ICES, putting out its advice in the fish stocks. And, you know, we're coming up to the start of the autumn negotiations in a demersal sense, with Faroe, with Norway, and indeed again with the EU. The talks with Faroe and Norway broke down last year. Well, I guess they never broke down, but they just never went anywhere. You know, the door was always left open, but there was little chance of anyone knocking on it again. So we're kind of hoping that we can seek agreement with Norway and we can seek agreement with Faroe. And, you know, the industry gets the point. The people, you know, my members that I talk to on a daily basis, get the point that as a coastal state, we need to stand up for ourselves. We can't just roll over. And, you know, we should get something from giving access to other countries. You know, I remember at the plenary last year for the EU, Norway and UK negotiations, Norway basically said, you know, you two have divorced and you're expecting us to pay the price. That's what the negotiators said. You have fallen out and you're expecting us to pay the price. And the fact that you gave EU access for nothing means that we're expecting access to the UK zone for nothing. So, you know, we understand there's big issues to get over. But at the end of the day, I'm sure there is a position and there is a narrative which can cover both Norway's position, Faroe's position, and the UK's position. The EU situation is, I guess, less insecure in as much as that we have a deal there, and there may be some issues to discuss in terms of, you know, tax setting, but the major issues with them are agreed. They get access, you know, certainly up to 2026 and probably beyond. But there is a deal to be done with Norway and Faroe, and we do hope that common sense can prevail this year and that a deal can be struck, because going another year without getting access to Norway with a significant increase in our haddock quota again, it won't bear well with the industry. And we're all trying to squeeze into our own zone just now, which is not good. You know, we normally have maybe 10, 12 vessels fishing up in Faroese waters. These are the larger vessels. And ordinarily we'd have 20 or 30 vessels out in the Norwegian zone. They're not there. They're all cramming back into our own area, all catching the same species. And the markets used to be able to, you know, receive 7,000, 8,000 boxes daily in Peterhead without a real impact on the price. That's now down to about 3,000, 3,500 before it starts to impact the price, because it's just all of the same type of fish, same size of fish coming in. So, you know, we are hoping that at the end of these negotiations, which may go into January, to be fair, that we get a far better settlement and a far better output, so that from the start of next year we can actually, go into these other areas if we wish.
It doesn't seem to be sustainable for the Scottish boats to keep fishing in their own waters. But recent research has shown that whitefish stocks have apparently doubled in the past 10 years. Should Scottish boats be getting more whitefish quota in their own waters?
Well, I mean, the main ones that have doubled, I guess, are the haddock and the whiting. The problem is that the haddock and the whiting we get in our waters are small fish, and we're suffering from a lack of processing capacity onshore to deal with that. Whereas we've got a problem getting home crew, the processors onshore have got a problem getting filleters. They used to have a significant amount of Eastern Europeans working in these processing sectors, processing factories, and they just can't get access to that now at all. So, whereas small haddock is it's time consuming filleting it, they just can't get the people to do it. And it seems to be the automation in terms of haddock, especially in the summer with the softer fish, is not in place either. So, the Scottish industry has a big problem coming up because, next to the pelagic stocks of mackerel and herring, haddock is our biggest one. And we're only going to catch a third of it, or maybe up to half of it this year. And then we're looking for a significant increase again this year for next year. I don't know what we're going to do because we just can't land it unless we can find another market for it. But if you look at the cods, suggested minus 10.3% in the cod, which is a big issue for us with the landings obligation and the mixed fishery. We're now looking at safe coming down 25%. You've got certain stocks moving in opposite directions. You've got the haddock and whiting, exponentially increasing, almost like a gadite outburst. And then you've got the cod, which we think is increasing significantly, being reduced in terms of the total allowable catch. And you've got the safe coming down 25% as well. So, yeah, you're right. There is more fish in the sea, but it's the fish that we don't get much money for. Haddock, over the last few months in Peterhead, has been receiving as low as 10p a kilogram. That's just, that was a poor price 40 years ago. So you can imagine how poor it is today.
You're talking there about crewing and lack of workers in processing plants. This is a big problem as well for the fishermen at the moment, fishing boats at the moment.
It is. And, what we're now seeing is vessel business plans accommodating foreign labour fixed costs because I guess it's cheaper, but the reality is that we just can't get enough home crew to crew the vessels that we have, notwithstanding the fact that since 2001, we've removed over 200 vessels from the Scottish fleet. Now, if we go back and analyse what's happened in our sector, way back in the turn of the century, the 90s, the stock started collapsing, 1999, the adoption of the precautionary principle, TACs coming down, less fish for the fleet to catch, vast areas of the North Sea being closed. We started to lose our crew to the oil sector way back then, back at the turn of the century when that began to happen. And that continued, and they never returned. And now, as a result of COVID and Brexit, we now see the incomes of the vessels last year down by 30% and as high as 50% in some cases, which means in an industry that continues to pay a share to home crew, it's a share fishing operation, means that they in return are getting less money in the pay packet. So the time when we're looking for more youngsters in the schools coming into the fishing industry, they're looking on at a very uncertain industry whereby the incomes have went down quite significantly this last year. But also, as an industry, we're suffering like other industries, certainly the dirty industries, because more and more people are now going into further, school leavers are going on to further education. Less and less people want to enter into the dirty industries. They want to sit in an office with a laptop or whatever. So, the pool that we're drawing from is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And we're suffering just as others are, the plumbing sector, the building sector. And the problem is that we're now having to go overseas for our crew. There are around, I think it's 4,300 full-time fishermen in Scotland. And around 1,450 of those are non-UK. Predominantly from the Philippines, but also from Sri Lanka, India, Ghana, and some from Indonesia. Now, even the situation with foreign crew isn't that great, because, you know, we have to bring them in a transit visa, which means that you can't operate within the 12-mile limit. And our vessels in the west of Scotland, most of their fishing is in that sort of Western Isles archipelago, so they don't get access to foreign crew. And when we take in non-UK crew currently under the transit visa, you know, they're not allowed to stay on shore while a vessel goes out to sea. So we can't give them weeks off or trips off or whatever. They've got to be on board the vessel all the time. Now, we lobbied hard for about a decade to try and get fishermen seen as skilled workers. And indeed, this year, the immigration changed its approach, and the fishing industry and chicken sectors were actually added to the skilled worker route. So we now have a number of skippers that have become sponsors. They've went through the certification process. They are now sponsors of their own right and can bring in workers under the skilled worker route, which would allow them to stay on shore. It allows them to stay in country for 4 years. It would allow them to operate inside 12 mile. But now we have the problem that we can't get them through the English language barrier because they have to sit a B1 English exam, which is reading, writing, listening and speaking. And it's very, very difficult to get through that exam. In fact, some doctors have been failing it. So now we have got a skilled worker route that is almost pointless because the B1 English exam is the hurdle. So if you piece all what I've said together in terms of employment in the fishing industry in Scotland, and indeed it's the same in Northern Ireland, and I work closely with Alan McCullough and Harry Wick on this issue, and it's exactly the same for them. It's an industry that's suffering from a lot of fronts, including the labour front.
Do you think the UK government needs to sit down and look at fishing as a different sector, a different ideology, and create a plan for it that works for it?
I think, in many fronts it does. This magic 100 million coming from Boris, which hasn't appeared yet, which he promised away back in January. We need to use some of that money to help the sector in terms of the onshore sector, investment and plant processing plants or whatever. It needs to get money to the offshore sector in terms of consolidation, in terms of immigration. Yeah, the skill set that fishermen have is not dependent on their control of the English language. So, I had a meeting with my own MP at the beginning of this week to try and get him to help us lobby for an exam. It's aligned with A1 English, which is just about, speaking and listening. It's as simple as that. That could help us significantly, but will immigration, look upon that favorably? Well, who knows, but that won't stop us lobbying for the change.
On the homegrown workers front, do you think that all the years that fishing was classified as being an unskilled job, do you think that has impacted people's image of getting into the industry? Possibly. We hear the stories up here about teachers saying to the pupils, you need to stick in your studies, you need to do your homework, because if you don't, you'll end up going to the fishing industry. That sort of narrative is not helpful. And indeed, for a number of years, we had tables at the parents' night, and where they sit and discuss which profession they want to go into, and we've had no one come to the table because no one was interested in fishing. I had a boat from 9-year-old. I've had 2 boats. I had 25-meter trawlers, sea net vessels actually, employing 16 of a crew, and I started at a young age. But it's a commitment, it's a lifestyle. Fishing's a lifestyle. It's not like going into the office at 9 in the morning, getting home at 5 o'clock at night, and if you get home at 7, you're disturbed because you've had to do 2 hours too much work. Fishing is different. Fishing is a commitment, it's a lifestyle. And it seems to be that the younger generation, or a significant part of the younger generation, don't want to get into that sort of lifestyle. I was listening to an article on Radio 4 coming through this morning, and it was about the farming sector, and it was about the lack of labour availability there because the Eastern Europeans are not coming back in the numbers that they were before, and they turned to local labour. And he said in most cases, the local labour would last 2 or 3 days, and then they just wouldn't come back because the work was too hard. And I think, essentially that's what we're now finding in the majority of youngsters coming through, that, the work is too hard. And why move into an industry where it's going to be extremely hard when you can go and get a softer job? Do you think there's maybe a need for a new sort of a recruitment drive or something, like to get into cities like Glasgow, or like, and maybe there's young people there who want to get out, and this might be a fantastic opportunity. They seem to do this in Norway and in Holland and other countries, and it seems to be success for them.
Yeah, you know, our Northern Ireland colleagues actually they put an invite to join the fishing industry on a European portal, and I can't, you know, specifically remember the numbers, the responses, and the numbers that they got back, but it was extremely poor. I mean, I think it was in single numbers, and you know, we've had, you know, in the back of some of the fishing programs up in the northeast that have aired on national television, we have had people that have come into the sector, but they last a week. You know, they go out, first day they're sick, second day they're sick, vowed they'll never return. Now, that's not to say everyone's like that, and I'm stereotyping probably unnecessarily, but, you know, you have to be committed. You have to be committed. You have to want to do it. And, you know, where there will be, you know, some out there that would grasp the opportunity, it certainly wouldn't be in the numbers that we require. Internally, we fund new recruits to come in and do their basic courses. And ordinarily, we get between 30 and 40 a year. And we probably retain somewhere around 15 to 20 of those a year. Now, if you look at the amount of fishermen retiring every year out of that 4,300 workforce, that's certainly not enough as plug the hole, and it's certainly not enough to replace the foreign crew that we have currently in place.
You think maybe starting people off on smaller inshore boats and working them up to bigger, longer trips? Because watching shows like Trawlermen and that, it seemed to be nearly like the long days at sea without coming to land, nearly that most of the new recruits in. Do you think because maybe like people like ourselves started on smaller boats and worked their way up, do you think that, you know, longer trips would be more?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but, you know, I live and was born in a small fishing village called Stonehaven. And whereas there used to be a number of small inshore sea-net vessels in that port when I was a youngster, and that's where I spent my happy childhood, there's only creel vessels left, you know, operating lobster and crab pots. But even those vessels are having difficulty getting crew. There's not a lot of them, but they just cannot get crew, and they're in every day. You know, there's some weeks they're never out for weather or whatever, but they just can't get crew because they can't guarantee an income.
So it seems to come down to the fact that fishing's just not as attractive as it was.
It's not as attractive as what it was. In many cases, it should be more attractive. The modern vessels, you've got Wi-Fi, you know, so the connectivity back home is certainly there. So, you know, it should be more attractive than it was previously. But, you know, society has moved on. There's other things out there to attract youngsters into. And indeed, up here now in the northeast of Scotland, we now have a very active wind farm sector. So anyone who is maybe looking for a job on the sea or involved in sort of maritime industries, then, you know, not only do we have an oil sector up here, which is in you know, reducing in numbers, but we have a booming wind farm sector. So once again, we're competing there. But it just, you know, gets back to this sort of basic principle that, you know, the needs and aspirations of you know, youngsters coming through the school system now seems to have changed over the last 3, 4, 5 decades. And we are having an extreme difficulty enticing them into an industry such as fishing, which is seen as dangerous, but does come with significant rewards. But it still seems that we just can't hold that attraction anymore. Outside
of the autumn negotiations, is there anything else coming up for the SWFPA?
There's always, you know, our desk is always full. We recently set up a crew services company to try and, you know, stabilize some of the practices that were in the industry in terms of a foreign crew. As you say, we've got the autumn negotiations coming up. We're currently in the process of distributing 100 defibrillators, which we were awarded a grant from the Scottish Government for 82,000. So we're distributing that currently around our members. And as I say, daily we're in touch with the wind farms, the fish farms. Yeah, it's just one of constant activity, mainly online now. But previously, you know, you were in constant travel in airports, airplanes, on the trains, on the road. So it's a different sort of activity nowadays, but there's a raft of areas that we are involved in. Foreign crews, one of them, immigration, you know, border force, all the aspects of that. But, you know, the one thing that drives the industry, the one thing that makes them happy, is being able to go down to the boat with their crew, knowing full well the fish are out there to catch, and they have the quota and the opportunities to be able to catch them and land them, make money, make profit, give their crew a wage, and make the boat pay and make the payments to the bank. That's it. That underpins everything about our sector. It's a business like any other business, like any other industry. You know, uncertainty we don't like. And like any other business, you run out of cash once. So, you know, the sort of component, the pillar that underpins all of that is the ability to land fish to market legally. So our whole focus has got to be on the autumn negotiations, liaising with Scottish Government officials, liaising with Westminster Government officials, and indeed, you know, working with our colleagues overseas. We're working with them just now in connection with ICES about trying to get a seminar up and running on North Sea cod, because we believe that's going, or they assume it's going in the opposite direction from what we think, because we think cod are in great numbers now. They're suggesting it's not, which means they're obviously missing some signals. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot to keep me busy. There's a lot to keep my members on my toes with, as they do constantly, as does every other industry leader. I guess they're constantly lobbied by their own members to make sure that their interests are represented.
Well, Mike, thanks for joining us. You have a busy time ahead, but we hope to hear more from you. We hope things improve going forward. Thank you for joining us.
Many thanks. It's been a delight. Thank you.